You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast.
Please, God.
This is God.
Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Its purpose is to dissect and discuss horror films, both old and new. This current season 6 of our podcast, we're opening up to the directorial auteur, that is Wes Craven, and what we're calling his nightmare years. And this is going to be our first venture into that area, which kicked it all off, obviously, and the name taking place from the film A Nightmare on Elm Street. And we're going to carry on his career right through to, and we're going to stop at Wes Craven's New Nightmare, where he revisits Freddy Krueger once again under the directorial banner. That's going to be our journey. We're obviously going to pepper that stuff along the way with some of the other films that were not part of the franchise. But we also want to, even though Wes Craven wasn't kind of overseeing the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise movies, as far as sitting in the director's chair, apart from the two aforementioned films, we are going to kind of look at the other films along the way for this journey and delve into the psyche that was Freddy Krueger. Before we begin, I should probably introduce myself. I'm the host for the podcast series. My name is Saul Murty, and accompanying me on this journey into A Nightmare on Elm Street is Oscar Jack. Welcome aboard, Oscar.
Thank you very much, Saul.
Good to have you on board again, and it's good to have a venture into a franchise with you. As you joined us for a little bit within the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series when we were looking at that.
Some of the gems of that one, three and four.
He says through gritted teeth. What's good about this though is that much like I've been accompanied by Miles Davies, our fellow podcaster on the Friday the 13th franchise, and our guest podcaster Ben Skinner from the Movie Nerds guys coming on board for the Halloween series. We are on that journey together, and this is what we're going to be doing together for the Nightmare on Elm Street, which is going to be kind of fun to kind of go on that journey with you. Before we kind of begin and dissect the movie, I often ask this, as you know, with my fellow podcasters, particularly with the film that we're going to discuss, A Nightmare on Elm Street. What was your early instance of kind of entering into the world of Freddy Krueger? When did you first watch this particular movie, and what do you know of him and Wes Craven before watching the film?
I think my first experience with A Nightmare on Elm Street would have been when I was maybe 14 or 15 and catching it halfway through on one of the Foxtel movie channels.
Yes.
I distinctly remember, I think I probably came in what is, in terms of a spoiler on the film of my thoughts, is probably one of my favorite scenes in it, which is Nancy's high school dream.
Yes.
I just remember the image of that body bag being dragged invisibly. And like that's just it, the memory of me watching that is so incredibly vivid, and I think over the years I've just kind of since then, of course, I've seen this particular film a number of times, including maybe 2 or 3 times on the big screen.
Wow,
which has been really great and constantly kind of surprising every time I rewatch it. Just with how affecting and how effective it is.
Yeah.
And then just kind of how different it is. And in terms of like what came before it, and even with the sequels, like this is like kind of a really, in the nicest way possible, a sore thumb of horror.
Yeah.
In the era itself. It's just kind of really unique.
Yes. Yes, and I think I was literally thinking about this just before our record session as well, and kind of playing around with it in my mind, because it really was a benchmark movie within the horror genre, but not just horror, but film itself. And I think that's why. I mean, I tend to ask this question at the end, but I'll say my opinion on it, and then I'll ask you the question at the end of the podcast. But personally, I think that's why it stood the test of time and it still resonates today. is because it taps into something, and what it does tap into in particular, and what makes this movie is something. It's something that everybody can connect with. Like the villain in this case is something born out of nightmares, and we all have nightmares. But if those nightmares are connected in some way, that this kind of villain can kind of pretty much jump into everybody's nightmares and make them real, then the fear becomes something that people will connect with, because Freddy's role is to create your biggest fear and make them real, so that he will scare you to death or kill you in the manner of what it is that scares you. But it's also deeper than that, because it's a psychological thing, and this is something that I got fascinated with, particularly like when we did Wes Craven early years sessions, when we first started off our podcast recordings on Surgeons of Horror a couple of years back. And that's that Wes Craven was fascinated with psychology and psychology of the mind and dreams. And you see that evident in a lot of his early stuff. And this is where he really took ownership of what was playing around in his mind and creating this character that we know of as Freddy Krueger. And essentially gave him a playground to kind of to work with. So I think so my point is it's something that we can't escape from our nightmares. We all have them. And so to have this kind of character enter that world, I think it just sits uneasily when anyone comes in to watch this movie in a good way. It kind of taps into the dark recesses of our mind and what we are all kind of essentially scared of.
Totally, you can't run away, you know.
And you can't, and it's interesting, and that's just on obviously on from a psychological level. There's a lot of stuff going on from a cinematography and narrative component that kind of tie all that in together, and then throw in Robert Englund as the character of playing the character of Freddy Krueger, somebody that I liken to somebody like Vincent Price, you know, of that era, that he is of my generation, you know, through the 1980s, kind of tapped into that. I want to say there's not really been anyone like him since. I could be completely wrong. I'm happy for people to object to that statement. But from a personal point of view, yeah, I don't like, even whenever Robert Englund's in something since then, like he has a habit of, he's a character actor, and so and he will eschew as much as he can physically into those characters he plays, and I think that's kind of something that's interesting. Prior to this movie, like he was been in movies for a bit. But like the one that stands out, and we've done a podcast on him, was Toby Hooper. Did a film called Eaten Alive, and he played a character called Buck, and he really stood out in that film. You know, so he was definitely on a career path, and this Freddy Krueger would be his calling card essentially. And he hasn't obviously been able to shake that image since.
Hey, well, yeah. I mean, once you've got the power glove on, once you've you've become America's sweetheart essentially.
Yes, that's it.
I mean, why would you want to shake it?
Yeah. It's interesting too, because we will touch on the remake at some point throughout this series, current podcast series. But it does tap into the fact that people keep arguing that nobody could play Freddy as well as Robert Englund, and it was always going to be a tough act for I've forgotten the dude's name now, but Jackie Earle Haley. But anyone that would kind of don that, and obviously that remake kind of tanked in a big way, but they're still banning around the idea of a potential another one coming up, and Blumhouse being the people behind it, I guess because of the back of the success of Halloween, and Kevin Bacon's name coming up and all that stuff. But, you've got to kind of look at Robert Englund and what he brought to Freddy to begin with, to make it so, because there are elements that he is cartoonic and and hammy, but that fits so well into the dreamscape universe that's created. Like it is this kind of real delicate act of surrealism and realism, kind of co-joined at the hip, and it needed an actor to kind of be able to balance that in a
be the bridge of tones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very much so. I don't know. I've kind of gone straight into Robert Englund, but I think it's so important to kind of talk about that, because the character of Freddy itself is something that kind of is so important within this universe, despite everything else that's going on outside of it. Yeah. So anyway, and also what I was going to tack on, just kind of coming back to what you were saying about your first experiences of the film and watching it on the big screen. I was interested because one of the things that led to this film's success is the video rental market. And a lot of people seeking comfort in their own home and watching it with friends, and that's what kind of brought it to the forefront, and then became, we're talking like pre-internet days, so it became word of mouth, getting around, and the buzz that followed it with these groups of people watching it together in the dark, but within their own confines, as opposed to watching it in a different way that cinema does. So if you looked at the two, how would you kind of balance your experiences of watching it on the big screen and at home, and the impact that had on you?
I feel like I think my general thoughts on particularly horror with home release and like watching it in the safety of your home, especially at the age that I did, there was always this sense of rebellion, of taboo, of like, yes. You know, like I'd have my finger on the remote ready to switch it over if one of my younger siblings or one of my parents came in.
Yeah, yes.
It's you know, it's very much the Wild West. Whereas watching it on the big screen, it just dominates. It takes your attention in a way that is like all consuming.
Yes.
And like, especially like, you know, cutting in and having that score first kick in, and I really think it is like, it's, you know, a bit of a masterpiece. There's just nothing like it. I've the reason I've seen it so many times, and I'm going to be seeing it at a Halloween marathon very soon, in the next week and a half. So I'll be watching it yet again on the big screen.
Nice.
Which will be great. Always good to be able to, you know, some certain movies, I think, just kind of, if not demand, like plead with you to watch it on the big screen.
Yeah.
There's just, like, the experience just doesn't equate. It's a different experience.
Yes,
and
yes.
It really is. It's really quite joyous. You've never seen a vodka bottle so big on a screen.
Yeah.
So many times.
Yeah. I completely identify, mate. There are certain movies that you have to say, as you said, have to watch on the big screen. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to watch this particular one on the big screen, but yeah, I think before we get into kind of like the nuts and bolts of the narrative of the film, I should just probably add that, like, this Wes Craven really wanted to kind of get this film made and distributed, and it was New Line Cinema with Bob Shea was the people that picked it up and helped make the film. But when it came to distributing it, they just struggled kind of getting anyone kind of attached to it. And there was I might get this wrong, but there was one of the big guys. It might be Universal or United Artists. One of those that they were trying to kind of sell it to first. And they balked at the idea because they just released a movie called Dreamscape starring Dennis Quaid. which also tapped into basically him kind of entering people's dreams. And the movie just bombed. And they, off the back of that, they just said, we've done a film like that, and nobody wants to see a film where somebody goes into someone's dreams.
Isn't that such wonderful Hollywood logic?
Yeah, that's right. But the result of that, off the back of that, is that Bob Shaye ended up going, right, well, we'll distribute it ourselves. I'll do it. I'll find a way. And he just put everything, so much money. I think he mortgaged his place several times over. And because he had so much faith in the movie, and that's how New Line Cinema was basically born.
What an incredible bet, Yeah, it really it's they'd call it the house that Freddie built.
That's right. Yeah, and it really was. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you watch when you're used to New Line Cinemas prestige opener generally, and then you watch this for the first time, and you just see this kind of weird dot matrix. It's quite an experience seeing their old New Line Cinema's old opener.
Yeah,
it's really it became such a well for them to be able to keep on going back to.
Yeah,
every time that they needed a win, because I mean, to the best of my knowledge, Freddie, he kept on bringing it in, which is always, quite remarkable to have such a win as this one that spawned into something where I think there's a really interesting conversation for us to have later in the series in terms of holding up seeing which of the great slasher franchises kind of holds up the best.
Yes,
seeing which one, because they all have their own kind of crazy trajectories, and it's I'm mildly devastated every Halloween that none of the others went to space. I think that's always a great number 10 or 11 for a horror franchise, slasher franchise, is to send. It would have been great seeing Freddy Krueger on the moon. That would have just been wonderful.
Yeah.
A mixture between Sam Rockwell's Moon and Freddy Krueger. That would have been phenomenal.
Yeah.
I might still pitch that to New Line. I'll see if they're interested.
Yeah. 100%. Well, look, I also want to. We are going to at one point. On that note, we are going to at one point look at Freddy versus Jason in this season. And you and I will bring Miles back into the fold too, because it kind of makes sense to bring him in with the Jason Voorhees combo and get a three-way conversation with us on that, and exactly that, how the franchises meet and kind of come to that middle point. But I equally agree with you that we will have that conversation as maybe towards the end of looking purely at A Nightmare on Elm Street and the impact that's had as a franchise over the years and how it's shifted and changed along the way. So definitely. So look, I just wanted to mention that about Bob Shaye, because obviously he was integral to this thing kind of even getting made or pushed out there. So all right, so let's take a little look at the plot and kind of break through it. I should say this movie was released in 1984. Going back quite a few years now. Just recently celebrated 35 years, is that right? Yeah, if my maths are correct. Yeah. And the movie's set very much in the time, so 1984, when we kind of kick off, and it's in a particular place called Springwood in Ohio. And I want to mention that because the other, Freddy's also known as the Springwood Slasher, in amongst that. But I live in Springwood, not in Ohio, but in New South Wales. And so I really like the idea that I'm living in a place. It's got no connection other than that, but I just kind of get a little kick out of that every so often. Cool. And we kick off straight away with a dream sequence. What I should mention as well is that apparently there are 8 dream interludes during this film. And each time we enter a dream world, it becomes more disturbing than the one before. And this is a deliberate part to play from Wes Craven's point of view, because he wanted the viewer, that is, to blur that kind of distinction between the dream state and consciousness. So you get deeper and deeper within the dream space every time you go in, which is very similar to how we dream anyway. We go through those, various stages of sleep cycles to then get down into a deep sleep where these dreams do occur. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. Sorry, Oscar, were you going to say something?
No, yeah, it's you really don't know. I feel like, especially if when you've never seen this movie, the way it jumps in, you're immediately unsure. It's you never quite know what's safe and what's not for this film.
That's right.
Which is, and you quickly find out that nowhere's safe. Like generally the recess of where we retreat from the world is no longer safe.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And what I found really interesting about this, the way the film's shot, I will touch on this at this point, is that when we are in the real world, there's a dreamlike quality to it that is disorientating when you're watching it. And there's critics that have written, and I don't know if I align with their thoughts on this, but they say it almost induces you into like a sleep-like trance when you're watching it. I don't think it goes to that degree, but I do get this sense of kind of what am I trying to say? Like this otherworldly kind of feeling that kind of shifts you slightly off balance as you're watching this movie, which I found really interesting as a journey through this. And I'll maybe as we talk through the narrative, I'll kind of highlight specifically what I'm meaning by that, because there are certain points in the film where it's more noticeable than others. But as I said, as we open the movie, we meet Tina Gray, played by Amanda Weiss, and she is trying to escape this kind of disfigured kind of man, who's kind of in this kind of very kind of grungy kind of clothes. We see the fixed kind of glove with the blades attached to it on his right hand at this point too. And I will say interestingly as well, I will mention Freddy Krueger's attire here, because I know he's got the hat, but more from that is the sweater is the other thing that he's known for. And it's got this kind of very distinct red and green kind of color, the stripes. And Wes Craven chose that color pattern because it's the hardest color scheme for the human eye to kind of correspond with. So it has this massive clash, and so we as humans kind of are drawn away from it naturally. But he also wanted that to serve as an identification, because the idea of Freddy Krueger is that, I mean, most of the time we see him as the embodiment of his human kind of persona. But the idea is that he's got this kind of elasticity or plasticity about him, where he is a bit of a shapeshifter and kind of can morph into other things. And the color scheme was what was important, that stays. So it doesn't matter what form Freddy presents himself as, the color scheme will always stay the same. Definitely a point that Wes Craven wanted to kind of stick to throughout the film, and also something he insisted on with the further films, which we do see more of. So very kind of cool. And that was so always thinking, like, that's what marks this film slightly differently from others is he was so in tune with how visually this thing had to be played out, and
Yeah.
psychology behind it to kind of have that or the impact that it would have on audiences that were watching it.
There's so much ideas. Yeah. There's so much thought that has gone behind every bit of it, I think it stands them apart from even some of the other like great horror filmmakers. And this, you know, like, and I'll you know, Freddy Krueger is just he's just the most interesting of the bunch.
Yes.
Like, you know, he's not only one of the few who talks,
I was going to say
like
that.
jests and taunts, but he's got such a dialogue with his with his enemies and his victims, and his, you know, the people who he is a victim of.
Yes.
It's just this great kind of embodiment of like trauma and of this kind of like this cycle of abuse that has happened, that is it's almost feeling like, not to the point of melodrama, but this kind of it's been, you know, kind of personified, and this this kind of back and forward is it's almost fable-esque. You know, it's them talking about, telling us this story of, you know, of the awful person and the awful person who was taken away by our parents via a horrible act, and the way that horrible act permeates and affects it's the sins of the parents. You know, it affects them in each way, and it kind of puts everyone on their path towards destruction.
That's right.
You know, you can get a lot from it. I think you get a more interesting dissertation on this than potentially you know, Jason Takes Manhattan.
Yes, and that what's interesting about, and I'm going to tap into what you were just saying about the parents kind of part of it, because that's a big theme that runs through this movie. Conflict that kids have with family loyalty and those that they kind of connect with most, which are their own friends and who understand. And this is like a big balancing act. And when you turn to your family for support and find that they are absent because they're an alcoholic, neglectful mum, or a hard-boiled kind of police chief who has other things on his mind, and you kind of turn to those that understand, and because they are sharing that same experience together as well, that kind of really solidifies that kind of whole concept that they have to go on this journey together, and they've only got each other to try and kind of get through this ordeal. It's just, and I think that's what, again, why this film resonated so deeply with others on the home front. You know, watching it, video rentals from home, and, you know, or dormitories where, you know, uni students would hire this thing out and watch it as a small party gathering. Very, very interesting film in that respect. So we get this, as we say, we get the Tina character, and so she wakes up. Basically, she's able to wake up from this kind of nightmare, and her mum kind of notices she's got these 4 kind of slashes across her nightgown, kind of. And so there's this, already we get this thing where it's not just a dream. There's something about this dream that kind of is real, and this thing is going to be dangerous for them. And so when Tina then shares that story with her best friend Nancy, who is going to be our heroine, and played by Heather Langenkamp. But the way this film opens up is that we instantly think that Tina is going to be our heroine, because that's what we're starting the narrative journey with. But obviously that shifts as the movie kind of transgresses. and we also so she's she's explaining that her kind of the fact that she's had this experience with this really bad nightmare, and she's also sharing that kind of experience with Nancy's boyfriend Glenn, who everybody knows this was played by Johnny Depp, and he's kind of one of his big breakout film roles. And so because of that, they decide that they're going to stay over at Tina's house, because Tina's mum's out of town, and they think like this sleepover will help her through that. And they're kind of talking about that experience. And I think it's at that point too, as they're chatting a bit further about it at the house, this is where Nancy kind of says, I've had the same dream about the same guy, and so, but it's kind of a little bit dismissed by the Glenn character from memory.
I think he dismisses it
out of fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to really talk about it because he does have, when they're at that night, when they're at their house, there's one little line that he drops that makes Nancy maybe suspect that he's been having the same dreams.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. So it's kind of we're already getting the hint that obviously this is a combined kind of as we already mentioned, this kind of combined connective kind of experience that they're all sharing. And this is the way that it's like any kind of virus, I guess, that kind of seeps into the system. This is how Freddy is able to do that, because the mere kind of talk of his name or describing him is how he gains power. And the more people talk about him and fear him, the greater he becomes. So they have this sleepover, and this is where we get this. It's really eerie. Those kind of the soundscape is really eerie that they play with here. They kind of feel like there's a noise coming from outside, and then we get introduced to the fourth character of the group, which is Tina's boyfriend Rod, who kind of jumps out on them, and he's very kind of like I guess the typical kind of rebellious kind of character, and
a little greaser-ish.
Yeah.
Leather jacket, and the first time we meet him, he's got his little gardening tool, reminiscent of the finger claws.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yes, which he's been using to kind of screech. That's what I'm saying. Like that sound alone, it's like the teachers with their nails down the old blackboard kind of days. Kind of sound like kind of real screeching. It kind of it's a sound that automatically kind of gets you kind of your teeth on edge. And that's played with a lot in the soundscape, because obviously that's what Freddy uses to taunt his victims before he comes. Is he uses that kind of scratching, kind of screeching sound with his claws of his glove. So we have it kind of set up. The kids are all kind of are at this having a sleepover, and Rod kind of shacks up with Tina in her room. And just before we kind of go into what would be the second dream sequence, there is a moment where Freddy appears over Nancy's head, through
coming out of the wall,
which basically they did that by using spandex, which was a newly invented thing at the time. So they're kind of playing around with the image of that, because they really want the idea of him coming, like this idea of him kind of being pushed out the wall. And it's a really effective look. It's something that stuck with me when I was younger to watch this, as one of the key moments of like, wow, that was really interesting, because it kind of breaks down the barriers of again between the reality and the surrealism of it all.
It's so iconic.
Yeah.
Anytime you see it from that point on, they kind of stuck their flag in it first.
Yes,
and,
yes.
The little moments that you'll see in like Stranger Things. It's the way that they can pay homage to it's that's such an element of using using new developed technologies in such a great way, which I feel like has been the basis of so much filmmaking. It's magic tricks, whether it's the invention of sound or it's in the invention of spandex, filmmakers will find a way to like make an interesting use of it on screen.
Yes, definitely. And it's done really well, as I said. And there's that's the bit. Is this the bit where the crucifix falls off the wall as well, and then Nancy grabs it? And it's almost like that's the point where Freddie resigns.
Omen.
Yeah, because so religion obviously is a big thing here too. Like Wes Craven came from an evangelical kind of Christian upbringing, and we do see elements of that in a lot of his work. None more so, I guess, than this particular film. And the chanting in the music even kind of hints at that, where it says "grab a crucifix" and things like that. So there are kind of moments in there, and then, but it's at this point where I think she grabs the crucifix or places it by her side and then falls back to sleep. Freddie then kind of falls back into the shadows again, realizing that he won't be able to get to Nancy tonight. He's done enough toying now, and now he'll go after the person he's been kind of hunting already, which is Tina. And so we then kind of fall into, as I said, the second dream sequence where Tina's asleep and she's being chased by Freddy Krueger. We get that kind of big line where he says, because she says, oh God, and he says, I'm your God.
With these extendo arms.
With these big extendo arms. And this is where we first see him being able to distort himself as well to become kind of this like larger than life kind of character that kind of defies gravity and logic and physics in order to
he really gets to have fun. You get to see so much of what he's capable of. He cuts his own fingers off and the green bloody stuff starts spurting out. You're like,
I love the glee on his face when he does that. It's like a party trick moment. He's like, hey, get a load of this, yeah, hey,
watch this. Yeah.
I love it.
It's like, what do you do? How do you fight when you see someone who's like, yeah, look, I've maimed myself.
Yes.
And it's nothing. It's so little to me.
Yeah.
It really is a gauntlet thrown down. If you didn't think this was going to be hard to start with, then like, what the fuck do you do?
Yes, definitely. So then we kind of get like this again, quite an iconic scene like follows this. So we get basically shown from Rod's perspective, the boyfriend, as Tina starts thrashing around and she's getting slashed across the chest and by an invisible force. And it's a bit of an old trick, but we get her kind of writhing up the side of the wall and up across the ceiling.
Well, she starts just straight up off the bed.
Yeah.
Which, like, it's still really effective. Like, yes. I mean, every time I watch it on the big screen, I'm always like looking for the wires.
Yes.
And it's pretty seamless. And I feel like, especially because of her performance.
Yes.
You don't like it. It's the best kill, I think, in the movie of just watching her like writhing around, hitting the roof, rolling down with the great, the like turning the whole room on its axis and her just falling up, and Rod just in the corner with some great trickery of him in the foreground, reaching out, screaming no, and her just kind of completely in the background, just getting carved up.
Yeah.
It's really, it's great. I think it's one of the great iconic horror kills.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a great moment. And like just on that note too, with the Manda's performance on that. So apparently, obviously the stage is rigged up so that the ceiling is the floor. But but she still had to kind of climb up into that space. And it always disorientated her. Every time she went into it, she almost got like a bit of vertigo happening with it. And she just it just spun her every time. And Wes kept having to say to her, "It's okay. It's the room that's changed, not you." But yeah, I wonder if how much that added to her performance too. With that, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so essentially, like, she ends up, as we said, being dragged across all kind of four spaces of the walls and the ceilings, before being kind of like dumped to the ground, onto the bed, and then Glenn kind of basically makes a run for it. Nancy kind of comes in to see him kind of just as he goes off. So from her point of view, it looks like he's the one that's done this. And he does. He kind of, the police kind of are trying to find him in the early instances of the next scene, but he kind of comes and he basically hunts down Nancy and approaches her, and he's kind of saying, "Look, I'm innocent. I'm not. I wasn't. This stuff was happening to her. I don't know what's going on." But then
barefooted.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so he's still like obviously shaken up and still been on the run. And the dad turns up. So John Saxon, playing the lieutenant, turns up, and basically it looks like this is what's interesting. I found he's basically used his sister as bait to lure his daughter as bait to lure him out, which you kind of go, well, that's a bit fucked up. But it kind of says where exactly he says that it's always about the job and what he's doing, so not so much his daughter. And so and then we get the next bit. So she's only really got her and Glenn. She's only got Glenn to kind of rely on at this point, to confide in, I should say.
She has to go to school.
Yes. Oh yeah, I just jumped a bit, haven't I? I'm so sorry.
With her mother.
Yeah. So she goes to school, and her mum's really like the introduction of the mum as well at this point. This is one of the instances I was saying about, which is really viscerally kind of weird, because the mum's and she's an alcoholic, but she's almost in a trance-like state the whole time, and that adds like quality to any interaction that Nancy has with her mum. Now, the mum, I should mention, is played by Ronnie Blakely, who she actually got an Oscar nomination a few years prior for her role for Nashville, which was Robert Altman love song to country and Western music. So she, along with her and John Saxon, they were like brought in as the name players essentially, because they needed some kind of name attachment to it. But I thought she's fantastic in this movie. Like her performance is eerie and unhinged in a warm, fuzzy, but still very distant and fractured way.
Sure.
And it's weird. It's a weird thing. Anyway, but as we said, so Nancy kind of has to go to school. And we have this next kind of scene, which we're going into the third dream sequence, essentially. And this is the bit that you were mentioning beforehand. So she's in a classroom space. But I should mention that the teacher in this is played by Lin Shaye, who people will now know from the Insidious franchise, among a couple of other things that she's done as the main character in that, the psychic character. Yeah, and so we have this scene where, and I forget the text or the topic that's being taught, but
the long tradition of Nightmare on Elm Street classroom scenes,
yes,
where they're learning about something that pertains to the film.
Yes,
whether it's about dreams or it's about it's generally about dreams.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, essentially. And so she then she falls asleep. She's at the back of the classroom. She falls asleep, or she looks like she's fallen asleep. And then we get the bit where it looks like she's woken up, but she's actually still in the dream state. And we see, that image of Tina wrapped in a what interestingly like a see-through plastic body bag.
Yeah.
Well, not your traditional kind of black kind of one. And she's a bloodied corpse, and we get her kind of waving and then being dragged off, and Nancy goes to follow her on the bloody trail. Yeah,
getting told off by a hall monitor.
Yeah,
not to run with a demonic Freddy voice.
Yes. And she's
wearing
those red stripes, which again is that again what I was saying about. So whenever Freddy appears, he's all, that color scheme is always present, and in this case, it's with the hall monitor. And then she kind of smiles at Nancy and does the wave of the glove to her. So we know that this is Freddy's form. And then basically the upshot of it is that Nancy ends up in the boiler room, which is her descent into hell. Essentially, this is Freddy's domain, and the boiler room will always is something that keeps coming up within all of the franchise. It's like his lair essentially, and this is very much kind of like the chase sequence down corridors and stuff, but within a boiler room context. And she ends up getting kind of cornered, and Freddy starts approaching her, and then she burns her arm, and she realizes that it's pain. She can experience pain, and by using that, she deliberately burns herself on the arm to kind of wake her up. And that's where she kind of wakes up in the classroom,
screaming.
Yeah. And notices the burn mark on her arm. And everything. That's when she realizes that at that point, it hasn't quite subconsciously gone in yet, but she realizes that she can be hurt within a dream, and that it has a physical resemblance in the real world. Now, I'm going to come to you for this, because you said this particular scene that we're just talking about is the one scene that really resonated with you when you watched this the first time. What is it you think about that particular scene that kind of hung so deeply within you?
It's that see-through body bag.
Yeah.
It's seeing this bloodied corpse standing up.
Yeah.
Telling, beckoning Nancy to follow her. And it's, when Nancy first wakes up, like when she shifts into the dream, the content, she's no longer paying attention. Not that she was in the waking world, but at least in the waking world, you could hear them talking sense. But otherwise, it just becomes this kind of melodic. It adds to the soundscape of them. I forget whether they're just talking gibberish or like they're stuck on a loop. It just kind of ekes attention away from the class.
Yes.
And just pulls her attention towards that door and to Tina, and especially this relationship of her seeing her best friend in this state, in this way. Yeah. It's just quite haunting. And also it's the first time that Nancy and Freddy come face to face together.
That's right. Yeah,
this person who becomes who becomes a real thorn in his side. It's it's one of the big kind of slasher heroine relationships.
Yes.
It's their first go about, and you see it's such a great depiction of Nancy as an inventive, creative, because I think creativity is something that all of these movies really hold up in such high regard. Like,
Yes.
it really does champion creativity.
Yeah.
They're always the most creative, no matter how bad the sequel. They're more creative than any of the others because they can be. Because you know, because it's such a, you know, because they're playing with the dream world. So
Yes, that's
it's
right.
such a wide canvas, and you see her creativity of grabbing that pipe and getting herself out of there.
Yes.
It's she's not helpless.
No.
And from that point, she's constantly like trying to figure out what's going on. And yeah, she's kind of on the case, trying to figure out what his story is, what, you know, like how, you know, if she could be burnt, then, you know, it's never hopeless for her.
No, that's right.
She's got a plan, and she'll keep at it until, you know, something gives.
That's right.
Which is always so fun. She's such a great character.
Oh yeah, that is, and the resilience that she has and stuff. I think, and it's what you want in a heroine character as well. You know, and that she uses her smarts to kind of try and outwit Freddy in his own world. Essentially, is what she does. And that's why it was always interesting to revisit her character, and she does come back a couple of times in the franchise. And I think kind of that was needed in a way to kind of ground it. So the next scene is, again, it quickly follows into pretty much into another dream sequence scene, because she's at home. We get the bathtub scene where her mum's basically saying, like, careful you don't kind of, you know, I know kids that drown in bathtubs when they fall asleep, blah, blah, blah. And Nancy kind of shrugs off that warning, and then we get that kind of whole sequence where and that it's a very infamous shot now with that, where she's lying in the bath with the hand and the glove comes up from between her legs. And Wes Craven has done that shot before in a previous film called Deadly Blessing, but in that instance it wasn't a glove, it was a snake that kind of comes up in the bathtub. So it's an idea that he's obviously played around in. It's something in his mind that and obviously this time round the execution's far greater, and then we see Heather kind of being we see Nancy being pulled down into the bathtub, and this kind of vast space essentially that's underneath her. And as Freddy tries to pull her under and drown her essentially. But then Nancy's able to kind of pull herself out, and, you know, the mum's practically at the door, and Nancy comes out and just said, "I'm okay, I just fell asleep." And it scared me. She kind of shrugs it off again, doesn't really confide in her mum, which again is telling about her relationship with her mum. And so this is where then she goes to kind of chat to Rod, so the guy that has been arrested for the murder of Tina, to kind of say, like, what, you know, she wants to suss him out. He believes that they are all having this shared experience, and she kind of goes to suss him out essentially at the station. And he kind of gets to tell her his side of the story from his perspective. And this is where Nancy then starts putting in her detective hat on, and it's like trying to put the pieces together, and realizes that Freddy was probably responsible for Tina's death. And so this is where she again turns to Glenn, because it's the only person she can confide in, and says, like, I need you to watch over me while I sleep. I'm gonna see if I can lure him out. But this is where Kruger presents himself, but not in the way that she was expecting, and he turns up to basically kill Rod. And he runs to the police station to try and warn him, but then wakes up with her alarm going off, realizing that it was a dream. At which point we see Rod being kind of wrapped with the bed sheets around his neck like a noose, and he's being pulled up to strangle him, essentially. And this is all happening, and Nancy and Glenn are trying to get in there, and they encourage Nancy's dad to kind of, go and investigate. But obviously by the time they get there, it's too late, and he's swinging from the rafters from the bed sheets and looks like a suicide. And as far as the police are concerned, it is a suicide, but Nancy knows that it's not. And so we've kind of had the second of the four basically has been killed off. Then we get some point. Oh, is that another dream sequence? I'm trying to remember the point where. That's right. That's right. The next sequence is at the sleep disorder clinic, isn't it? Where she goes to the mum insists on taking Nancy to get her assessed because she believes that she's having these nightmares and she's not wanting to sleep or can't sleep at night. So I
love myself a good science. It's like scientists in a horror film.
Yes.
Of like probes and wires and any they're all looking through the window as she goes to sleep. It's a trope that makes this, and the third one in particular.
Yeah,
I enjoy it so much. It's such a great setting, and something that is that he gets to play with a little bit, and then really make the strong point of having having it be medical professionals. I love when they're brought into a horror film, when they're when it's people who are actively trying to seek out the truth and trying to when they come to the point when does your science explain this? It's a real the antithesis of people's faith in religion being tested.
Yeah,
it's people being unable to explain the unexplainable. It's such fun.
Yes, no,
Nancy. She gets to go in and have a bit of a rumble, and comes out pulling his hat from the dream.
Yes,
that which his mother very very dotingly added his name into the band of his hat.
Yes,
so now she's got a name. Yes. She's got an extra little clue, and she realizes that she can bring him in. She can bring him into the real world.
That's right. So that's a first indication that she may be able to kind of have the upper hand. I do want to add at that point too, the guy that plays the doctor is Charles Fleischer, who went on to kind of do more known for his voice work. Chiefly among those was Roger Rabbit from Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh.
Yeah, which is kind of strange. But I swear, I was trying to look at his stuff as well, but his face is a bit familiar. I feel like I've seen him in something else as well, but I can't quite pinpoint what it is. But like I said, more known for his voice work. So then we kind of get the next sequences where we really see the impact of the mum realizing that this Freddy Krueger character is somehow invading her daughter's life is starting to seep in, and we start to see her drinking and smoking a lot more heavily. And then the bars get put on the windows, kind of caging Nancy in the house. And it's a little protective kind of way.
They because she approaches her, she comes at her mum. Is where she says, Freddy Krueger.
Yes.
Who who is Freddy Krueger? And we get that great, such a great kind of little spiel from the mum.
Yeah.
Showing her the glove and saying, Freddie, he can't, he was a filthy child murderer,
Yes.
He can't hurt you, baby. He can't hurt you because mummy and daddy killed him.
Yes. That's right. Yes.
It's this great kind of turn of the screw where you're just like, Jesus. Okay, so he's a child murderer.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a great moment because this is basically overline what am I trying to say? The overarch of this being that, and again, this is a biblical thing as well, that the parents, the way that the parents have parents' actions are basically kind of are judged and tormented through vengeance on their children, essentially. So what they've done to try and protect themselves has repercussions. Taking the law into their own hands has repercussions on their own kids, and we start seeing that. And this is the integral ingredient that's kind of planted at this stage as well. That's why that these kids are all the children of the parents that rounded up Freddie and burnt him alive, essentially. So we do get that kind of whole kind of background story to Freddie and who he is, and this kind of and troubled mum trying to pour herself heart and soul out as to what they did and why they did it. And so then this is the point where Nancy says, okay, I'm going to try and lure him out. I'm going to try and I can win this thing. I can do this. And she tells Glenn, she calls Glenn up and says, I need you to wake me up, stay awake, and I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to try and lure him out, but I need you to stay awake and call me.
And Glenn is just utterly hopeless. He's a real useless wet bag.
He's a bit.
with his headphones, listening to his records as well as his TV.
Yeah. On his bed. Yeah.
Yeah. His mum asks him, "How are you supposed to hear what they say?" And he says, "Why do I care what they say?"
Yeah.
American swimsuit business.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And his dream is the simplest.
Yes.
Right? Like because he doesn't even get face-to-face time. We just get when he does fall asleep, we just get those arms coming up.
Yes.
And pulling him down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's been warned. She keeps on warning him, don't fall asleep, fall asleep. And he does, surprisingly.
So what's it?
Stimulus going on.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting, like it does, now you said that, and you're right, we don't see any interaction with him and Freddie. But it would suggest that, and the earlier scene where it's alluded that he's aware of who this Freddie person is, that Freddie has been tormenting him for some time. And that's probably why he's easier prey than Nancy, perhaps.
Sure. And obviously Freddie needs a win.
Yeah, that's right. He needs a win. Like, he's not getting very far with Nancy, and so he needs to pull down another barrier that's around her to be able to get. And then we see that, that now infamous scene where the blood just pours out. The parents come in and see the blood pouring out from the bed.
Just utter reverse waterfall.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
the viscera just.
They apparently had this was a one-shot deal as well, because they literally just had to blow up the bag of blood and then just let it fall, and obviously they flipped the shot from upside down from the camera lens's point of view, so it looks from our perspective that it's coming from the bed. But yeah, it was like a one-shot deal, and it paid off. And apparently, it was also a big homage to the hall scene in The Shining, where the blood just kind of comes pouring out. It was a big kind of nod to that moment. Yeah, so we get the end of Glenn, And so the police come to investigate, and Nancy realizes that she's on her own on this thing. And so she has to try and work out a way of sticking to her plan and try and lure Freddie out. This is where she basically realizes that she can only be the one. She pleads with her dad, because her dad's across the road. She basically says, you promise me that I think I can get him. I need you to just I think I know who he is, and I need you to promise me that you'll be there when I call you. And he kind of misses it a bit, doesn't he? And a bit, because he's on duty. And
he says, "Yeah, of course, yeah, yes."
Yes, that's right.
Pushes her aside. She gives him the time.
Yeah.
Come in at this time.
Yes.
As she prepares, she does her Arnie from Predator, the Predator series.
That's right.
Booby trap going along.
Yeah,
she's had her book earlier that is like defensive. It's like booby traps and it's like an army manual.
That's right. It's
so great. She's got a sledgehammer that she's set up. And,
that's it. Everything's there.
Gunpowder in the light bulb, and just sets the whole thing up. It's a miracle that the mother didn't walk out in a drunken stupor and
just setting it off.
Yes.
For fuck's sake, Mum. I spent hours setting all that up. That would have been hilarious. So she goes all MacGyver and kind of gets all this stuff set up before she takes some pills to kind of put her to sleep. And then we get the whole kind of that whole kind of interaction, basically. Like she's able to lure him out for real, but she's not so sure if it's worked yet. And we see the footsteps. Is that right? Where's the bit where he comes on fire? I'm trying to remember now.
Oh, sure, yeah. So she manages to pull him out.
Yeah.
She set her alarms to wake her up.
That's right.
She's able to pull him out, and he chases her through the house.
Yes.
Where is? Yeah. Where? How does he set? He sets on fire.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out because I know it's in the basement. Is how it happens, and he basically ends up. She kind of is able to because he gets doused in oil, and then she's able to kind of set him alight, essentially using a Molotov cocktail. And this sequence is I think I'm not going to remember the stunt man's name off the top of my head, but it was quite a long sequence where he got fired for, and they basically kind of said, right, you just call, you let us know, you shout when we want to put us out, and he basically did this whole running around and then climbing up the stairs and falling back down sequence. And he then came in and obviously extinguished the fire. But it was a lot longer than they were expecting, and hats off to the guy who said he could do it. But I think at the time, I want to say at the time it was one of the longest sequences of a stuntman being filmed on fire. I may be making that up, but I think I remember reading that somewhere. So anyway, so that all kind of happened, and then that's when Nancy rushes to the door for help. The police turn up along with Dad, and they find that they go down in the basement and he's not there. But then when they discover the fiery footprints, and they kind of follow that around,
going up the
stairs, and they find. We kind of missed a bit during the dream sequence where she's trying to climb the stairs and her feet going trying to escape as well.
They just sink in like goo. It's
basically, I think they used like a mixture of porridge and something or other and glue to kind of make that effect. But anyway, so they and we see these kind of fiery footprints going up the stairs, and Nancy goes up along with her dad, and they kind of go in and they basically see Freddy Krueger smothering the mum, who kind of into this skeleton kind of form, and they kind of disappear into the bed and vanish completely
into the ethereal dream plane.
Yes,
which is where like the climax, it kind of from that point
Yes.
is where I think a little bit of the the logic kind of goes out.
Yes.
Which I think is fine, because you're dealing with dreams, but it's like, okay, wait, what can happen? What the rules kind of get thrown out the window.
Yeah. Because he's now brought her back into his world. I mean, I guess it has to be like, if I guess there is. I'm maybe kind of trying to excuse it a little bit, but if she's able to bring him out, then theoretically he could easily bring them into his world too. That maybe not a one-way door,
Well, that's the thing that really works in its favor, is that it's all about dreams. It's it's the it was all a dream, but not a a kind of an excuse. It's built into the cake.
That's right. Yeah. So we get this kind of like ending sequence where Freddy takes the mum away, and we're kind of left with this very empty moment. The dad kind of leaves the room and leaves Nancy on her own, and she turns a bit back, and then we see the Kruger character, I guess, using the spandex kind of thing again, where he rises up between the bed, and this is where we get that kind of, I guess, crowbar insert escape clause situation, where she realizes that Freddy is only built on the fear, or invoking fear in those that he hunts down. And so she basically says that to his face, said, like, you're not anything, you can't hurt me. Turns it back to then,
I reject you. She casts him out.
Yes, that's it. And she turns around,
turns her back on him.
Yeah, that's right. Turns back on him. He lunges for her, but then he basically just disappears into nothingness, because he has no effect on her anymore. And she kind of realizes that, smiles, opens the door, and then we get this kind of moment, the climax moment, where she enters outside, and it's a bright kind of morning. It's a bit foggy.
Beautiful.
There's a line where she said, "God, it's bright," which is again another nod to the religious element that's playing a part within it. The reference to God, and that it's a heavenly image now that she's walking into, and then the twist part where Mum is alive and says goodbye to her at the doorstep, and the friends turn up in a car, and she kind of gets into the convertible to go to school, and then the top, convertible, and the top suddenly comes up, locks them in, windows are locked. The guy, basically, like, she turns to look at her mum, and we see, as the car drives off with her kind of screaming to her mum, we see those girls doing this skip rope thing and chanting the nursery rhyme, and we then see what potentially is the smallest window to a door ever, and then Kruger's arm comes smashing through and pulls her body.
That's right. It pulls her straight out.
Yeah. In pure kind of mannequin form, inflatable doll, I think it is, that they managed to kind of pull through. And I think again that was like a one-shot deal. They had to kind of just do it, and it kind of, it is, but it kind of is quick enough that you can get away with it. Yeah, and then that's the climax, the end of the film. Now, interestingly, at the end, that wasn't always going to be the ending of that film. That wasn't how Wes Craven had it. He
wanted them to beat him.
Yeah,
right. He wanted it to be a New Line in their infinite wisdom. No, he can't be gone. This is too good. I've mortgaged my house. You need to be able to squeeze a couple more out of these.
But Bob Shaye apparently, and this has been quite a lot, but apparently he said to Wes Craven, I've given you this film. I've put everything into this. You owe me this one thing. And like kind of dangling that in front of him to kind of say, you need to have him alive at the end. And Bob Shaye was like many directors and producers, were inspired by Brian De Palma's Carrie sequence, which was that dream sequence at the end with the hand coming through the grave, out of the grave, I should say. And what is now famous as that kind of final jump scare, or the villain's not really dead, which has become a big horror trope now. And he insisted on it being put in there, and obviously, because of that, whether he knew it at the time, sequels will then be able to leverage off that because of that one moment. And history was made. There is another edited sequence at the end of that where it still happens, but we then see inside the car and it pans across, and it's not Glenn that's sitting next to her, it's Freddie, and it's Freddie that then drives off before the mum gets pulled through the window. So it then plays on the whole idea of we still don't really know what's dream and what's real, as we're really completely submerged into this now. Yeah, so because of that, history was made and a franchise was born out of it. What we are, so final thoughts on that, and like particularly when you've watched it recently about the movie. I mean, we've kind of hinted that we do feel like it stands the test of time. Did you get any new learnings from it from your recent viewing? And do you still? You are going to go and see it again, but there must be something about the movie that pulls you back in each time.
Yeah, I think it's always really interesting with these kind of mega horror franchises that have such a kind of aura about them, and this kind of cultural perception that is built that is kind of generally really far removed from the first outing.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
it's the way that I always think of Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Halloween. It's generally more so for Nightmare because of where the sequels kind of go to.
Yes,
I'm always really surprised when I watch the first one.
Yes,
I'm always surprised at how interesting the filmmaking is, how it is a really great film, and it's not a cash cow yet.
No, it's not. No, that's right. Yeah, more of that will come.
Yeah, more. We'll get that. But it's such a creative and unique and original idea, and it's and while I don't think it's my favorite of them.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I think it is probably, and I won't say which one is my favorite
till we get to the end. Yeah.
Till we get to the end.
Yeah.
While it isn't my favorite, I think it is the best.
Yeah, I guess that's going to set the benchmark for what comes, isn't it? I mean, that sets the ground rules for what will follow. And one of these things, and I'm going to throw this question out to you during the rest of the podcast as we go, not in this podcast, but of our franchise discussions, in what makes a good sequel, because there's a few rules around that about how it still needs to live and breathe the world that was created from the first one, but have enough identity of its own to separate it and stand on its own right. And a fellow colleague, podcaster, and myself, Ant, and I often go to Aliens as that kind of example of that, because it's definitely within that world, but it was created in a way, thanks to James Cameron, in a way that was very separate. It was a very separate film. It wasn't, whereas Alien was a horror film, Aliens is very much an action film, but it still lives within that world, and it's a very strong film in its own way. So I may ask you kind of that kind of question as we go through each to kind of look at that, and does it do enough to warrant its place as part of the franchise or not? Before we bow out, I'm looking back at my notes and just realizing a few things I just wanted to kind of mention, little tidbits that I missed along the way. And that's like the genesis of Freddy itself. Some of it comes from Wes Craven had a real life occurrence where there's a mysterious stranger cropped up outside of his apartment, and he happened to wear a fedora hat. So there was kind of that stuck in his mind, obviously, at some point along the way as he was writing. along with the name Freddy. Freddy was the name of a kid that used to beat him up, so he's got this kind of connection with the name of the name Freddy. And he has this vague memory of when he was a child asking his mum if she could protect him in his dreams, following a nightmare. And that's when he realized that parents can't help you. In that instant. And that kind of was something that sat with him a little bit when he was writing this. You are kind of, it's the one area where you are really on your own, and you can't really call on anyone, which, we find with Nancy's journey is that's what she comes to realize, is that she has to use her own guile to escape. And what was the other thing that I was going to mention? Yes, Craven also, he was kind of a little bit interested with Johnny Depp and Heather Langenkamp in the making of this movie, because they were very beautiful people, and air of innocence that surrounded them, and he was almost a little bit jealous of them in their makeup, their physical makeup, and it wasn't Craven, sorry. This is Robert Englund watching them. And he basically used that to fuel Freddy's rage towards them as a channel, because he thought, that's what I'm going to tap into. That's what I'm going to use to kind of anger himself and build him into that moment and attack these kids that seem to have this, very kind of innocent appeal to them. Yes, I thought that was interesting. And the last thing also was that Sean Cunningham, who directed Friday the 13th, and had a strong connection with Wes Craven as well, as they both worked on Last House on the Left together, which was Wes Craven's first film. There's a point where the shooting was getting quite on top of Craven right towards the end of the shoot. I think it might have even been like the last day. And basically kind of called on Sean to say, look, I just need somebody to act as a, second unit director, just to kind of catch up on some bits and pieces for me, to tidy up while I finish off the other. And Sean came on. So he doesn't get credited, but he did come on and help. And actually pointed out a big difference between the two filmmakers as personalities are concerned, saying that Wes was very quietly spoken and when he talked to you, whereas Sean was very much like a bit more aggressive and kind of in your face and very emphatic about what he wanted. And she found that real jolt at the time when they were filming, which is kind of interesting take, because both interestingly, because as I said, they were both worked very closely together in the very first films together. But they have a very different directing style with their films, which is interesting. But yeah, so just a couple of things I wanted to throw in there at the end, as I didn't get to mention along the way. And the last thing I'm going to say, and this is from my personal reaction to A Nightmare on Elm Street and when I was first introduced to it, because I didn't get to say that at the beginning. And it's an interesting story, because my experience of Freddy Krueger was about Freddy Krueger before I'd even seen the film. I forget how old I was. I would have been young. But I was staying at a friend's place, and he house backed onto a car junkyard. And he was a year or two older than me, and he had clearly obviously seen the film. And then he wanted to play an imaginary game, and then Freddy was the character that was after us. And so I had a very vivid imagination. And so I instantly kind of scared the shit out of myself, playing this imaginary game, being pursued by this character that I must have had a vague image of what he looked like in my head, running around this junkyard trying to evade this imaginary figure. So when I came to watch the film, I felt that fear factor almost straight away, and connecting with that kind of, because it tapped into the imagination and dream world. For me, of all the franchise films, even though I have a strong kinship with Halloween, but all of them, this I would say was the one that shook me the most when I first watched it. I think everyone has that one horror film that really gets to you when you first get into horror. And for me, this was it. So it's kind of, that's what I meant by the beginning, that I was going to enjoy talking about this one, because I have strong memories of seeing it and my connection to it. And I'm looking forward to the journey that we will have along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it'll be a fun ride. But on that note, we should probably bow out. We've probably talked our legs and arms off on the original A Nightmare on Elm Street. And what will kickstart, as I said, our look into Wes Craven's nightmare years through his film journey. But until then, I should bow out. As I said, my name is Saul Muerte, the lead host of Surgeons of Horror. Thank you for tuning in and listening. And also extend my thanks to Oscar Jack for accompanying me on this one. Thank you, Oscar.
Always a pleasure.
Goodbye.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.